Hello and welcome to this opening masterclass. My name's Sandra Hebron and I'm delighted that today I will have the pleasure of talking with our special guest, Doris Dörrie. As many of you watching, I'm sure, will know, Doris is one of the most important storytellers in contemporary Germany. She's made many acclaimed and widely enjoyed feature films, as well as documentaries and works for television. And along the way, she has been celebrated for reinventing the German relationship comedy. She's also a very well-known writer. She's written novels and short stories and children's books. She's directed several operas. And she also teaches creative writing at the University of Television and Film in Munich. Doris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
I guess, like quite a lot of people living outside of Germany, I first came across your work with the release of your third feature film, Men. And I think we will want to come back perhaps and talk about Men a little bit later in the conversation. And since then, I've been fortunate in that I've been able to see a number of your films at various different film festivals. And over the last few days, I've been enjoying my own mini Doris Dörrie retrospective, if you like, revisiting some of the films that I remembered from before. And I was really struck by how effectively your films connect with audiences. I really find them a pleasure to be with, even when they're asking me, or actually you're asking me, to think about some quite significant or profound human and existential questions. There's always a pleasure there. And I wondered if we could start with, I'm curious about when you first found in yourself that desire to tell stories.
Well, first of all, thank you for your very, very kind words. Thank you. I'm deeply flattered and honored. Thank you. Well, I think it all started because of my three sisters who are younger than me. And when I learned to read and write, I found that literature was an escape for me, to get away from all the hubbub and also from my extreme jealousy. I really think that is very important in my biography as a filmmaker, that I was very, very jealous as a child, and maybe still am, because my sisters, who came right after me, they're twins. And they were so incredibly cute and so adorable, and the entire world loved them. And I remember myself standing right next to them and being just extremely jealous and knowing that there was no way for me to ever become as adorable as they were. So when I learned how to read and I found out that I could enter stories and live inside stories, it became extremely important to me. And I had this little corner and a chair that I remember very vividly, where I would just read mainly fairy tales. That was my first piece of literature, fairy tales. And just not only completely dive into those different worlds, but I would become one of the main characters. And I was flabbergasted how language, writing, turned into stories and different worlds. And I never quite got over the fact that you write down a simple sentence like a pink giraffe stands in a forest, and it becomes an image and it becomes the nucleus of a story. And that you can achieve such a thing with language, I found breathtaking, overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So very early on, I started writing these mini stories, teeny weeny stories, to check out whether this would also work with my language, to create a story with words. Yeah, that was the beginning of it. And of course, I was very, very much supported by my parents, because they were, and my mother still is, an avid reader. And my father would read 7 to 9 novels a week, although he was a full-time doctor and really very, very busy. But reading was the big hobby of the entire family. We didn't own a TV. That also helped. We didn't own a TV. So the entire family would sit down after dinner and read.
Yeah, that sounds glorious. When did you start to share your stories with other people?
Oh, that came very late. It came very late because this is something I've been talking about a lot and thinking about a lot. For a very long time, I was too shy to really write something down and put it out there. So I decided to study filmmaking instead of writing, because I could not imagine myself just saying I'm a writer. I always wrote. I wrote stories and screenplays, but to put myself out there as a writer was something that was well, of course not unheard of, but it was just not something that you would do as a young woman. It was presumptuous. I think that was the connotation that it had. You just could not call yourself a writer unless you were a genius. And the decision to study filmmaking was ideal for me because I could write screenplays and hide behind the screenplays, because screenplays become movies. So they disappear. The writing disappears. And actors would come and take my lines and do wonderful things with them. So I didn't have to be present as a writer, or didn't have to show my face as a writer. I disappeared behind the film. And only because I gave an interview after the extreme success of Men in a big magazine in Germany and talked about my short stories that I kept writing for my screenplays. I always wrote prose in order to get to know my characters. And the best publishing house and the most wonderful publisher in the German language read this interview and asked me to show him my stories, which I did. Luckily, I showed him my stuff, and he published my first stories. And this was Daniel Kehl, the owner of the Diogenes Verlag, Diogenes Publishing House, Diogenes. And he encouraged me to separate prose writing from screenwriting. And from then on, I was liberated, and I could write prose as prose, and I could call myself a writer almost. It took another, 10 to 15 years for me to really say, okay, I'm a writer, which in German sounds much more presumptuous, preposterous than in English. Schriftstellerin. It always has this, the sound of Thomas Mann.
Exactly. I was thinking about the sort of weight of literary history that sort of comes with that terminology, whereas maybe film, it's a much younger medium, and also it has the space it occupies is a little ambiguous between kind of art and industry.
Yes, and it is a collaborative art form, so you can always ask somebody else for help. You can always find collaborators, which normally you don't when you write prose. It's just you and nobody else.
Yeah, and I'd love to come and sort of talk a bit more about the different processes as we sort of go through. But you talked about choosing to study film, but before you studied film per se, you went to the US to start your not to start your education, but to start, I guess, the education that might lead to a career. Could you talk a little bit about why you wanted to go there and what the impact on you was?
Yeah. It's a complicated question. I think I really went to the United States because of the pop culture, because I wanted to just go to where the movies came from and the music and everything. And there was a theater group, and a street theater group, who, I don't know why, they performed in Hanover, where I was born, where I grew up. And I saw them and was so completely overwhelmed by their work, which did not really exist in Germany. Street theater, no. Improvisational theater, no. That was not something that you could study. But it turned out that they came from the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, and my extremely cool parents encouraged me to, yes, to just, go to America and try it and apply for a scholarship and just try it out, which I did. And I never really studied that much. I soaked up the culture. I soaked up what America had to offer. And there was an important piece of advice for me in America, which really is basically the Nike slogan, just do it, which is very un-German. In Germany, you don't just do it. You try to be on the safe side always. You try to follow the rules. You try to get it right. You try to get good grades, but you don't just do it. And that was, I think, the most important lesson for me that I got from America, to just try something out and just do it and not be afraid of failure. And also, again, something very un-German, it was okay to be entertaining, which, again, in Germany, until this day, is something that is difficult in the art world. You either entertain, and that is, film and TV series, or you produce art, which is, literature and the fine arts. But there's a strong distinction until today that you better not be entertaining if you want to be taken seriously. And
sorry.
No.
I was just going to comment. I find that sort of separation. So, I mean, we have it. I mean, I think it's, you know about the German experience much better than me, but I recognize elements of that here too. Somehow we find it very difficult to reconcile those two. And yet in our real lives, we have those two things together all the time.
Yes, I can't. Yeah, I can't quite believe that it's the same in Great Britain, because I'm in such awe of, especially English storytelling, British storytelling, in literature, but also in series and in films and feature films. I find it so incredibly courageous and entertaining and witty and all these things, and intelligent. And I could just name you my favorite TV series right now. They're all British. So yeah, I have a hard time believing that it's the same. Yeah. But anyway, this attitude of let me entertain you as the first requirement turned my world upside down, because my German mind was very much trained to either be serious or entertaining, but not trying to unite these two things. So when I came back, and this is really the reason why I could make a movie like Men, I tried something that was seen as completely uncool and almost forbidden, to make a movie that was entertaining, that was fun. You just didn't do that. It was not something that was considered remotely interesting in the film world. And
yet that resonated with so many people, not just in Germany, but internationally. I mean, it was an incredible success.
Yeah, it was weird, because it also, you played in China. We went to China with a movie, and people laughed about it in China. And it was, until now, it's a total mystery to me what they picked up in the movie and why this was also funny to them. Because to me, it was a very specific story about a very specific crowd, specific people in a specific time in Germany.
But sometimes those very specific stories are the ones that have the great universal resonance, and I guess as this proved to be. But I wondered what it was like for you to have that really phenomenal success. You were still quite young. You were a relatively short time out of film school, and it must have really changed things for you.
Well, I tried to not let this change anything, which of course was impossible, but I tried to just stick to the same kind of lifestyle, friends, of course, to my world. What helped enormously in retrospective was that we didn't make any money. We who made the film, we didn't make any money with it, because we had really bad contracts, and nobody had assumed that a teeny weeny movie like this one could possibly have great commercial success. So that, I think, was very important, that I didn't become rich and that my world could stay the same, that I was not catapulted out of my world because of money. But yeah, still at the same time, it was very scary because I was pretty much on every front page for months and months, and it was so unusual, and I became a trademark and all these things against my will, which this is what happens when you become famous, that you become two personas, at least two, the public one and the private one. And I found it very hard, very difficult to get these two things together and to understand that fame is something very dangerous, yes. And that I had to be very careful to stay away from it, to not fall for it, to not try to repeat myself, to do all these, or not do all these things, yeah. So now, you know, I'm very wary when people become very famous very early on, very young. I find it, I don't pity them, no, but I can see the extreme danger in it. It's much healthier when it comes a little later in life, I think.
It's almost not pitying, but having perhaps a degree. I sometimes feel like a slight worry for people who have.
That's the better word. Yeah, I worry. Yes.
But the stories of people having a very successful film in the film industry and then being sent all kinds of, you know, incredible sort of projects. I mean, there are lots of stories like that. I wondered what men meant in terms of the kind of, I mean, I guess for you, because you've always written your own scripts, perhaps you were not in that situation where people were sending you multiple different versions of men.
Oh, yeah. Of course, it was also very funny because the phone kept ringing in our commune. I shared a flat with my sister and my boyfriend and other people, and all of a sudden, they had to answer the phone. It was really Hollywood on the phone. And then I did go to Hollywood, and I had my Hollywood experience. I made a Hollywood movie. It was disastrous. That's the normal Hollywood experience. I had an agent. I had all these projects. I had a studio deal. And then I think, again, I was very lucky because I had to make up my mind whether I wanted to have a child with my beloved husband or not. And there was no way back then to really combine these things, have a family and make Hollywood movies. No. And I was pretty much the only woman around in my age group in that world at that time. And I decided to go back to Germany and start a family. And it's interesting now because, yes, it was the very conscious decision to not have this big international career, which of course could have gone wrong just as well because I might have made shitty movies. Very likely I could have made shitty movies, but there was no way to do this in Hollywood, have a family and make movies. But I was able to do this in Germany because I knew how to work things here, and I knew how to be very fast and very effective in film producing. We started our own production company with friends, and we had our daughter with us on the set all the time, and we were very much supported by friends who were part of the crew. So here it was possible, yes.
I wanted to ask about the setting up of the production company, and what you've said helps me understand why that was, the route that you chose to follow. Because I think we often assume that people set up production companies because they want to have more control over what they're making. But it sounds as if you also needed to have control over how you were making the work, not just what you were making.
Yes, and it was also a means of financing because we were 5 people in this production company, a DP, director of photography, me, a lawyer, an editor, and a production person. And we just put in all of our salaries, and we had, in 5 minutes, we had the initial financing for a project. And we could then take it from there, and we already had our starting capital, so to speak, with all of our salaries that we put into the project. And then, of course, we always hope that the movie would pay its money back and that we would eventually get paid. Sometimes this worked out, sometimes it didn't. But still, because of this, we were so incredibly fast, and we just kept producing one movie after the other. And that was very clever.
Mm. And I'm thinking about the landscape that we, sort of live and work in now, and that's very different. But do you think that's still a good model for people trying to make work today? If you're if you find a sort of group of people that you like to work with, is it a good a good way to sort of have that?
Always,
control?
I think.
Yeah.
Yes, always, because filmmaking is so stressful, and you need support. You need emotional support, especially when you start out and when you're very insecure, and when also terrible things can happen during a production, and you need an enormous support and also an enormous network. And to do this with people who you really like and who you trust, I still find is a good model.
And are you still someone who tends to work with people, multiple times? Do you have a sort of? It's almost like in theatre, the way that you would have a kind of ensemble. Do you have amongst the people that you work with some regular collaborators?
Oh yeah, yes. I shot the past, I don't know how many movies, 10 movies with the same DP, and it's always the same editor and my same producer. And yes, and I mean, by now we're pretty old. The initial crew, we're getting to be older, and it's again, very sweet on a different level. It's not about the support that I just talked about in the very beginning when you're very insecure. Now it's about being aware of each other's ailments and difficulties, because they're starting now. And yes, this is again something that is very very emotional and very dear to me, that we can share our physical difficulties with each other, and we don't have to be afraid that we don't manage anymore to get from point A to B. Yeah, we'll figure something out. So yes, it gets to be something else. But yes, I'm just
when you describe it, it makes me think about dancing. It's like when you dance with someone that you've danced with for a long time, you get you recognize how to sort of move around each other.
Yes, and I had a very early impression what this could be like to be working with the same people for a very, very long time, because I visited John Huston on the set of The Dead.
Amazing.
That was his very last movie, and he was sitting in a wheelchair, and he had his oxygen tank right next to him, and his crew, the colonel of his crew, they were in their late 70s, and he was in his 80s, and they all had physical difficulties, this and that, but they were so intimate with each other and so fast in their way of thinking and coming up with artistic solutions. And it was just very, very impressive to me as a very young woman to see how connected they were on a very mental and emotional level. And I never forgot that. So yeah, I'm not there yet, but this is something that I'm hoping to be able to achieve, to just keep on working, and no matter whether one of us is going to be in a wheelchair or not. So we'll see.
And it's really lovely to have those enduring, sort of professional and personal relationships.
Yes, and I'm trying to teach. Sorry.
No, please.
I'm trying to teach that to my students, that very early on you have to find your partners, but not only financial partners, but really your soul partners in this business, because you will stay connected for a very, very long time, because very early on you find out with each other what it is that you want to talk about, what your topics are, what your artistic preferences are, and then you don't have to talk about it anymore. It becomes something very mutual, and that's what is going to carry you through the ages. This mutual understanding of, yes, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to tell stories. And these are the stories that we want to tell.
And you've told stories in a range of different forms, and you've told different kinds of stories. So I'm interested in how far you think that the kinds of stories or your topics or, you know, the areas that you're interested in exploring, how they've kind of shifted or developed over the course of not just your working life, but your life.
Yes. As a female director and writer, I think it came with my situation as being pretty much not the only one. There were others, but very few. In film school, there were 2 other women, for instance, in my class. And later on, there were not, I didn't have any peers. So I tried to stick to what I know, which is maybe a piece of advice for writers in general, but I didn't really reach out to very, far away topics. I tried to be very, very accurate and very specific about the world that I noticed around me. I mean, again, when you want to talk about men, it was very, very specific about the men who I noticed in my immediate surroundings. I shared apartments with them. I worked with them. I saw them at parties and so on and so forth, which I think is a very female way of reacting to not venture out very far from your home turf. So this might be also something I think should change, that you don't feel limited to your home turf as a woman. But I felt not only safe in describing my immediate surroundings, I also had I could take liberties to play with these elements because I knew them so well. And I took this further and further. For instance, a movie, you don't notice it sometimes in a very successful movie, Cherry Blossoms. It's not evident that it's quite autobiographical because I switched the genders, and it's not about me, but about an older man, a Bavarian man who loses his wife. But of course, I was trying to talk about how I lost my husband when I was very young. And the great success of that movie, and also of the sequel to it, which is pretty autobiographical, gave me the courage more and more to become even more autobiographical. And even in a movie like Greetings from Fukushima, this is also about me having visited Japan so many times and having gone there right after the disaster of the earthquake and the nuclear fallout, and trying to talk about myself and describing a woman in that movie who not only looks like me, but is very German, tall and German and blonde, and she doesn't fit into most beds and rooms in Japan because she's so tall. And in my writing, it is now something that I enjoy more and more, to try and be even more autobiographical, even more accurate about my world and what I notice. But yeah, for quite some time, I was also a little too shy to call it autobiographical. I tried to disguise it and put a veil over it.
But with a film like Cherry Blossom, where I know people have sometimes talked about it in relation to the Ozu relationship, but there's something in the film that feels so very authentic about the experience of grief that to me that makes perfect sense that it would be very personal and autobiographical, because there are some things that Rudy does in the film that I think if you haven't been through the process of grieving would look quite bizarre. So, for instance, the dressing in his wife's clothes. But anyone who's lost someone close to them really, I think, understands that. And you show that with real empathy and a lack of judgment, I think.
Thank you.
It's such a moving piece. So to hear you say it has that sort of close connection to you, that to me, I can't imagine the film could be that way if it didn't have that.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, for me, no, I could not have written it without that personal experience, that's for sure. But this is true for most things that I write or have written, that I need this personal perspective. I need my autobiographical take on things. Because otherwise, and this might again be a female problem, otherwise I would feel insecure. I wouldn't really know whether I have the right to talk about it or whether I would get it right. But
yeah, so we've talked about a few things that I think clearly help me understand what helps in your creative process, your creative work. I'm interested also in what sort of impedes or gets in the way. And that idea of getting it right just feels like it's such a sort of millstone around our necks.
Yes. And yeah, I've become such a sucker of noticing things. And I try to, this is, I think, what is maybe also difficult to achieve, or more, and it becomes more and more difficult because we consume reality secondhand through our digital way of life, and to just sit on a stone, like a famous poet in medieval ages, and to look around is something that I find so important for writing. And I force my poor students to literally sit on a stone or on a chair outside and to just write down what is happening around them, and to just keep doing that for a long time. They really complain in the beginning, and then they very quickly get the gist of it, that the closer you look at things, the more interesting they become. But to really dedicate yourself to your surroundings and to let the 10,000 things come towards you, which is a Zen saying, rather than to impose your interpretation onto the world and things. This is something that I not only believe in, it's also something that I enjoy tremendously, to just sit and look and listen.
Which is a very meditative process.
Yes, although, yes, since you are writing it down, it's not strictly meditative, or because you are processing something that is already in the past, which I find really mind-blowing, that everything that you experience is already happening in the past. So yes, but yes, you could still, I think you could call it meditative.
No, I really take your
practice.
Well, yeah. But I take your point that you're not really, if to be meditative, you would just be letting it come to you. You wouldn't be doing the next,
and you wouldn't be putting it into language.
Yeah,
and you wouldn't process it in your mind to become something else.
Yes.
But still, I do agree that it is meditative to a certain extent. I mean, not in the strict Zen sense, but it is meditative because you have to really open up to what is going on, and you have to shut down your inner monologue in order to be able to look and listen, to watch and listen and take things in rather than interpreting.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your about how you write, and I feel like and I was going to ask you if you are someone who, some writers are very clear about having a routine. They get up at a certain time, or they go to a certain place, and they set aside a certain period of time in the day to write. How does the process work for you? I'm getting the sense that that might not be how you do it, but I'm not sure.
Well, again, this is a very female way maybe of developing a writing practice, but I never had time with a little child. I didn't have any time whatsoever. So I developed this 10-minute writing practice for myself. And I forced myself to just write 10 minutes a day. I didn't have more than 10 minutes usually.
Wow.
And I would write these 10 minutes. A lot of these 10 minutes took place in the kitchen while something was cooking. 9-minute pasta, I overcooked them. I had 10 minutes. And I tried to squeeze in these 10-minute pockets as much as I could. And strangely enough, I achieved more writing than before I had a child, where I could just spend hours and hours procrastinating and never really writing. And this has become such a valuable practice to me that I still start out with these 10 minutes every day, and then 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes in the evening, 10 minutes during lunch break, 10 minutes wherever, 10 minutes while waiting. Instead, and this has become quite difficult, instead of looking at my phone, instead of checking Instagram, instead of writing emails, instead of checking the news on my phone. And yeah, it has become more difficult because we lost our boredom, which I found so extremely important. In order to produce, I need to be bored, because when I'm bored because the bus is not coming, then I start scribbling something down into my little notebook. But we're never bored anymore. So we have to fight for these time pockets much more than ever before.
Yes, I feel that we're so, it's distraction. We're so distracted.
Yes. And the human mind loves distraction more than anything. And it does not like concentration as much as distraction. So it's a constant fight. You have to turn things around, and you have to turn around consuming into creating. The big payoff for this is that consuming does not really satisfy us in the very end, whether it's your digital consuming or eating or shopping or whatever it is. We all know that at the end, we don't feel nourished. We don't feel satisfied, not really. We feel kind of nauseous a lot of times. But if we turn it around, consuming into creating, and even for 10 minutes, it makes us much more vivid instantly. Because being creative revives you. Consuming does not necessarily revive you in the very end. In the beginning, you think, yeah, oh, great, another lipstick, another piece of cake, another Insta feed.
Yeah.
And once you've realized this, that is really the way out into feeling much more vivid, satisfied, lively, better when you just write for 10 minutes, then it's easier to get into the groove.
So one thing I'm often curious about is with people who are both writers and directors. You write, and the way you've described your writing, it doesn't sound like you're in a sort of far away, solitary sort of retreat, but still the writing is somewhat solitary. And then you have to make the transition to directing, which is, even with a small crew or in an independent film, is very much not solitary. How do you manage that transition?
Oh, what I enjoy the most is to rip that writer apart, the writer of the screenplay, which is myself. Just go, oh, cut. Oh, these lines are just awful. Cut them. Do something else with them. That is such great fun, because really almost always we come up with better things together, especially, of course, with the actors. And I love working with actors. I love their instinct, their timing. They have this animal instinct about your good lines, and for something that they can work with, and you can read it in their body language, their faces, when lines don't work. And I don't know whether I could be so ruthless with another writer than myself. So I just love to throw things out on the set. And I just love this process of creating something together as opposed to sitting alone at my desk.
So on set, the atmosphere on set is a very collaborative atmosphere.
Yeah, because I can get out of my little brain and just try to get everybody else's creative energy and ideas. And I find that so interesting because, frankly, I'm quite bored a lot of times with my own little brain.
And that counteracts your shyness?
I'm not shy on the set ever, because this is the job of the director. I cannot be shy, because if I'm shy, everybody else is going to be shy. So I have to undress, metaphorically speaking, and I have to show myself naked so that everybody else can do the same and not be shameful. It's about shame. It's not about shyness. It's about shame. And of course, there's a lot of shame always involved, because every idea can be the wrong idea, or it can be stupid or embarrassing or a whole lot of things. So I see this as my main job as a director, to get rid of my own shame so that everybody else can do that too.
And I'm very interested in how, because your films do really land with audiences, when you're writing something, or indeed when you're filming, how much is the audience in your head, or are they not there? Does that come later?
I don't know whether anybody can really imagine the audience, or whether you can only imagine a bunch of people, like your friends, or not family. Family is terrible, because family will never tell you the truth. They will always love you and always say, oh, it's great, even when it sucks. And also close friends, they would never destroy you and tell you the truth. But I think that every writer has an inbuilt shit detector, and that you really do know when something is bad or when something works okay. The problem is that you have to be able to confront that reality, or the truth, that something is not working. And sometimes, or a lot of times, you cannot come up with a better way of saying it, describing it, a better plot point, a better everything. And then you try to tell yourself, oh, it's okay, it's going to work, it's not so bad. But I think that you really do know. But a lot of times you don't find a better way. You don't find the solution. And it's especially true for screenplays. If something does not work in a screenplay, it's not going to get saved by the editing room, and it's not going to get saved during the shoot. You will have to deal with it until the very, very end, and it's still not going to work. Okay, then you can just lose it altogether maybe, but unless the writing gets fixed, it's very difficult to fix it later on. But a lot of times it's really difficult to fix it, because you just cannot come up with the right way. And on the set, there's not enough time usually to come up with solutions for bigger problems, like whole scenes, or a combination of scenes, or the whole dramaturgy. That is something that you can't really solve on the set with others. I mean, with actors.
So your experience has been very varied, and I wonder sort of what you're still longing to do.
The little word "still" worries me. Yes, it becomes still. What do I still want to do? I want to keep telling stories. I just shot a comedy only with women. Takes place in a female public swimming pool, public bath. I don't know what to call them. They don't exist in England, I think. Do they? No.
Yeah, the public swimming pools do. Yeah.
But just for women?
No, sometimes we have women-only sessions, but they're open to men.
No, but whole public pools just for women?
Yeah. No. I wish we did.
Yeah, it's an interesting question whether they should still exist or whether this is, again, against gender, God, what's the word? Justice. Gender justice? No, what's the word? Help
Equality.
Me out.
I'm not sure. Equality or
equality? That's the word. Yeah. Why shouldn't men be also allowed into women's public pools? That's a question that could be asked. But anyway, and to work with such wonderful actors and to also be able to make people laugh is becoming more and more important to me as I go along, as I become older, because life tends to get a little bit harder when you get older, and there's a lot of disease around, and people die, and horrible things happen as you grow older. And to be able to spend 7-8 weeks on a set and to invent something that is entertaining and funny and also heartfelt, of course, and emotional, but to spend these weeks with things that are not a matter of life and death is something that I relish more and more and more. And I don't think I could. No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, by the way, the use of the word "still" was in relation. That was about the huge, the huge amount of sort of creative outpouring that we've seen from you. It wasn't to suggest that there's a finite amount of time.
But it's a valid question or a valid word. Yes, things do become still. Yes, they do, and I have to confront myself with it. And everybody who gets older does. And yes, so yeah, what I was just trying to describe about shooting comedy is, yes, it's a decision because of the word "still" to maybe not shoot tragedies rather than comedies, to not write tragedies rather than comedies. I think it has to do with the word "still." That I don't really want to spend such a long stretch of time on a set and surround myself with sorrow and grief, because I have that. I have enough of that in my normal life. And in a lot of people who are part of this process, this creative process, part of the people in the crew, they have to deal with it as well. So we become suckers for comedy as we grow older.
Well, I really I love your comedic work, including that work which also has an element of the tragic in it. So
always, yes.
I'm really looking forward to the next films that I get to see from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In the meantime, I think we have to draw things to a close, and I feel like we've barely begun to. I have so many more questions, but equally your answers have been incredibly rich. So thank you so much for spending the time.
It always depends on the questions. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk with you, and thank you for your great questions.
I hope we get to speak again.
Me too. Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best to you on your island.
And to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Take care.